Good to hear from you. You sound upbeat, you sound healthy, you sound well. It's a good thing.
Yes, I am, and it's good to reconnect. Hi, Ndu, how are you doing?
Very well, Wanjiru. Everything is all right.
Yes, and it's also good to hear Dr. Mercy.
Good morning, Wanjiru.
Yeah, and missing City. City is okay? He's in good health?
He will be fine.
He's fine, eh?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
So, Wanjiru, the COVID-19 basically has drained the swamp and left this particular alligator right out there in the open.
Yeah. I've heard the conversation. In fact, going back to the very interesting conversation you're having about the evictions.
Yes.
Around the Dandora sewage
Kariobangi.
Land reclamation. The Kariobangi.
Yes.
Yeah, land reclamation. This is really symptomatic of the issue, the underlying belly, this soft underlying belly of the COVID response. Namely that because of the inequality, the decisions that government has been making with regard to its investments, these factors have come together and created a situation that really is impossible to deal with unless you get to the foundational. And I think you were talking about that. We need a human rights-based approach, an approach that is people-centered, an approach that recognizes development is about people, it's for people, it has to be done with people. And this government doesn't get that. They have, the dictator's playbook where you're saying, people don't know. They need to be guided, and you need to be benevolent, but hard, use a strong hand and strong arm. And this really is not going to help. And I think it's a big concern, and I think you've already talked about that. And what I'm encouraged about is that different forums, different sectors have come to the same realization. So, you'll be listening. I was on a World Bank meeting with various other civil society actors from different, there's very conservative civil society, there's more progressive, and there's radical. This was, a good array of conservative, fiscal analysts, economists, the same issue came out across the board, human rights based. We've imported models that aren't working for us. And then when you link that with a very regressive political culture, we then see a COVID response that's really not speaking to what Kenyans need.
What do we have that's not working in the current COVID response? Look, we have been given a lot of freedom. We've been told, you're being urged every day, you're being encouraged to wash your hands and stay indoors, and you don't stay indoors. You're being urged every day to observe social distancing and physical distancing. You don't observe physical distancing. You saw the governor of Mombasa just the other day just getting frustrated, wondering, all right, so people, we have said this. I've even mobilized. I have said we're going to be able to provide for you meals that can sort you out for some period to come. And you are still not observing the measures.
Yeah, that is true. There's a real legitimacy crisis in the response. And I would say that stems from a couple of things. One is there is a culture there's a culture of mistrust. And this has to do with lack of political legitimacy of the regime and of political leadership. There's then a culture within Kenya which mirrors the very high level of impunity in political culture. So yes, we are a very disciplined nation in that regard, but that's got to do with our political culture. And I think a third thing would be that the way government engages with citizens is high-handed, and so it's expression of political might. So government pushes and citizens push back. Right. And I was talking to somebody yesterday And they put it very well, because we are working around informal trade. And we are trying to, trying to work with government, which has its own dynamic, but trying to influence the government, the social protection measures, the economic cushion measures, to make sure they respond to the sector. And, I was speaking to somebody who says there's an entire sector there that is used to operating without government. Mm-hmm. When you look at informal settlements, you look at informal trade, these people survive despite government.
Yeah.
In fact, government is an intrusion.
Yeah.
No, government is an intrusion, because all government does is regulate and set regulation, tax measures that impinge upon them.
Yep.
Government doesn't provide services. You look at these places, you don't have access to running water, sewerage, garbage collection. Residents of informal settlement, informal trade mainly do this for themselves. So they have some solutions that are very illegal. They have some that maybe are more acceptable, but they survive despite government. And every time government comes into their space, it's to evict them, it's to harass them, it's to, cajole. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and to tax them.
To tax them.
Wanjiru, can I come in and ask you something here? Yesterday we had a conversation with the government spokesman, and I think he was at pains to kind of reconcile between why Kenyans would not do what they're told, basically. Can we connect the mistrust and probably to the point of distrust that Kenyans have of the government, and then why they refuse to do certain things? And this is across the board. We're not just talking about informal sector, right? Or from cutting across social strata.
Well, I think, obviously you'd have to do a proper study. But yes, on the face of it, our political leaders don't follow the law. I mean, the law in Kenya is a suggestion. Actually, you only follow it.
It's a proposal.
If you have no choice.
Yeah.
Proposal. It's an affirmative proposal that you evade if you're able. So yes, we have an ingrained culture of violating the law from the very, very, very top, and this is daily. So when government speaks, there's a lot of legitimacy is a very important thing, and legitimacy is built and cultivated. And this government has a low legitimacy, and we talked about this, I think, the last time, rooted in the contentious election of 2017. Those results.
I saw you going 10 minutes back there.
Have to, because people don't exist in a vacuum.
Pet peeves.
I don't exist here today. When government speaks to me, I see them. There's a whole spectrum of issues that come to bear on that statement. So they are all part of the process. So one, legitimacy. The other thing is the manner. Our community systems have broken down. And really a response like this requires good community response. And in Nairobi particularly, unfortunately, the response has been caught up by this tussle over the power grab, as Eric, you like to call it, which is so apt. But unfortunately, the political tussle over these functions has completely immobilized the Nairobi response. So there is no Nairobi response.
It's a national response.
You can't, it's a national statement, but the enforcement has to be on the ground, because people live on the ground.
Yeah.
It's about communities. It's about residents associations. It's about your local administration, your Nyumba Kumi, really saying this thing matters to us. So that system has broken down. So yes, government has done some things well, but there's then this deficit. And if they are to stand back and reflect, they will realize you can't force legitimacy.
But the legitimacy question also, it's debatable. If we go to the county level, so you can say that the national government, there could be a legitimacy issue stemming from the contentious 2017 election. In some counties, there was no contention. Mombasa, for instance, there's no contention in terms of the county leadership. But we are seeing people questioning and people standing and pushing back at what their governor, whom they elected overwhelmingly, is telling them to do.
Yeah, now that's the other point. And I concede that we have a very low culture of compliance. But the other point that was being made is that if people don't perceive that solution as realistic to their reality, as useful to their reality, they will violate. And the issue is the balance between health and livelihood. So the question is, and this goes again around the evictions. If you look at eviction guidelines internationally, also in Kenyan law, there's strong emphasis on consultation. People have to understand this is why we are doing this and this is how it's going to be done.
Yeah.
And then people need to be able to feedback and say, yes, but when you do that, how will we eat? How will, so there's a lot we don't know. There's factors that are political with regard to the failure of our local governance systems, because even county governments haven't taken time to build those up. But there's also the reality of what is the impact of the COVID lockdown and these measures that government has taken on livelihoods.
Yeah.
Because if I perceive that measure, that curfew, is impinging upon my ability to take care of my family, that's a no-brainer.
You will flout it.
So there are things we don't know because the dialogue isn't happening. And you can only have dialogue at the local level. So the first thing, government took immediate measures and had to. It's a pandemic, no one was prepared. But very soon after, they should have instituted this dialogue. Now, we've been talking to informal trade associations, and we interviewed about 28 of them across the country. And the dialogue isn't happening. They don't know. Government isn't telling people this is what's going on.
They have no access to this information.
Access to information. They also don't believe that people have solutions.
Okay.
Because at the local level, I might be living in an informal settlement. I don't have running water. I've tapped illegal power. That whole setup. But if there is a conversation about this disease, what do you want to do? I'll have a contribution in the solution.
Formal traders or people in informal settlements as a whole, and that our community systems are broken. That means they were there at some point before they got broken. And in all this, I'm wondering, where does the State Department for Social Protection come in, if at all it does, or how do you work with them? What is their role? What's their function in all of this? Because I think apart from the Ministry of Health, this should have been the other department that is very vocal, whose CS and PS is at the front line, side by side by the other CSs.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I must confess, I don't have an answer for that, other than what we've evidenced in our work. This ministry has funds that are disbursed, and they have, they then disperse money to vulnerable populations, including the elderly and such. We haven't interacted with this particular ministry, but from our work in the national budget process, what we've noticed with government is that they set up funds which they perceive to be the solution to the problem they want, but that's not necessarily well grounded in a community system at the local level. This ministry disburses through the national government administration. So it would be the chiefs at the local level.
Yep.
Constitutionally, public participation is a county function. So counties are then supposed to set up not community structures, actually public participation structures. They are the ones who are supposed to provide the framework. Where national government and county government are not, liaising and coordinating, you then have very parallel structures at the local level, dishing out money, doing, budget processes and various things without intergovernmental coordination and without meaningful participation. So you have money being allocated, which is great, but it is participating the people as opposed to really saying, so what does this sector need beyond the transfer? Because the elderly need many things. They need social support. They need maybe access to certain amenities which the county has. So my analysis of where the shortfall is one, this money is a little bit of a handout given by the administration to allow them to spend most of their money on large infrastructure projects while saying we have money that goes to vulnerable communities. Instead of dealing with the fundamental issues, these elderly people, are they able to access the level of health care they need? Are we making enough investments in health care? So my answer to why we are not seeing a good response from social services is because government doesn't really place a premium on this aspect of social services in terms of making sure that you report on how these funds have been used to improve the welfare and livelihood of those who are benefiting. So all they do is tick a box and say we've been able to transfer 1,500 to these many people, and they don't know whether you transfer that money to somebody who's critically ill. The family has had to sell their land to be able to
just maintain them and support them. And the government is very good at that, at ticking boxes.
In the COVID box, ticking boxes and also working in silos. So the COVID response, we have seen that because the first thing we told them is vulnerability targeting, the households at the local level. You need to bring on board the county because county also has a social services. County has community health services. County has the decentralized and public participation services. They need to work with the national government to identify who are these vulnerable, who need the support. But we really have, I keep saying it's a soft underbelly, but really it's an abdication of responsibility. And maybe we need to prioritize because, public participation, community engagement is treated as a secondary or...
It's just a by the way.
It's a by the way to governance.
Is it because
COVID is teaching us that it is really the center? It's where governance begins.
If you look at community engagement and working on social structures, do you think or do you see it as if it's a difficult job for government because here the results are not tangible? You'll not say we have put up 2 structures, or we've done A, B, C, and D. It will be either a healthy population, people are going about their other economic activities. You cannot really point a finger and say, like you've supplied a machine or something. Is it that it requires more work, more intellectual work even, as opposed to these other brick and mortar things?
No, in fact, in our analysis, because yes, we've also tried to reflect on this, it's about interests. Because our governments are not sufficiently responsive to citizens to feel they need to report to citizens because they are able to buy their way through elections. So their primary motivation is the next election.
Yes.
So brick and mortar is tenders. And it is putting money in your pocket or in the pockets of those who will enable you to come back. So, it all comes back, by the way, to this political culture, the capture of the state, capture of government systems. It is one. So it is political interest, this political economy of corruption.
How does it change?
The second thing is ideological. So we have, we have a political culture that is based on, I don't know what philosophy we run on as Kenyans.
None.
Yeah, so we haven't really sat to say, what defines us. And this is what BBI was pretending to do. But really, it's fundamental. We need to say, what are our values? What matters to us? So when we engage with government, you can see their eyes glaze over when you start talking about public participation, because public participation is difficult. Building community structures is difficult. But then the benefits are exponential, because you then have ownership of government, of public projects. You then are able to tap community resources, so that development in the medium to long run becomes more effective, more sustainable.
That would be ideal, Wanjiru. That would be ideal, because for those of us who sometimes exist in the ideal, that would be what the case would be. But now we look at a situation where regime after regime, administration after administration, individuals who maybe would not be tainted still come into a new administration, but the systemic issues are still glaringly existent. How do we change? Because this conversation that we're having now, it's possible that we had it last year. It's possible that we had it the year before. It's possible we'll have it next year. For as long as this happens, we're going to continue having the conversation. If there's going to be a shift, what needs to happen?
It has to start from the people.
It's got to start
I would put it, I'd put it to you that we are not the only ones having this conversation. Look at what's happened in America. And, of course, they have a lot stronger kind of culture of democracy and people say. But look at government priorities. Look at what happened in the UK, the oldest democracy, oldest democracy, can be argued. And look at the kind of decisions that government has been making.
This is what I'm saying, because it's a system that works, Wanjiru. This is actually the crux of my question, Wanjiru. Just hang on a minute. Because how then do we change it? If you look at the people sitting on this end and you see government, you've just said it now, that in other democracies where people agitate and it changes, a system is in place that works. How then do we translate that on this end of the pond, where we are seeing the problems that you've talked about just now? How does it change?
The point I was going to make, before we talk about change, we need to understand the problem. And the problem is we have the impact of global neo-liberal policy is also part of the philosophical kind of disconnect for us. So that not only do we have a broken political system, very broken electoral system, we are trying to build our constitutional architecture, and it's heavily contested and there's lots of interest. Not only do we have high corruption, linked to that, there's a global development philosophy that is, and there's analysis have been done. Who benefits from large infrastructure projects? Because this is foreign funding that comes in at very high interest rates, that then benefits businesses that are, in the West. But this money is made readily available to our government. And there are handouts and there are kickbacks to government operatives who then also benefit. So it's an elite capture, but it's not just local. So what do we do? Well, I think we need to recognize we have to work at those various levels. So, and this is like a big change agenda. And I would say what we are beginning to do, like in having this conversation, is the beginning of the change. And every time I hear on radio or I read an article from somebody who's maybe in the legal profession, medical profession, saying we can no longer have this top-down development, bricks and mortar as opposed to human development. That is the beginning of the change, because we need to radically transform how we do business. And this change is, what are our budget priorities? How do we hold our political leaders accountable? And for me, the other big thing is self-governance of the people. And this is really strengthening that local level structure. And I think it starts with a conversation, and it starts with the network.
I think it should start with the people, Wanjiru, because if it's only limited to people in government or people who have access to government, that elitist conversation, then it never translates down to government. And the government is looking at where the majority are. I mean, as long as the majority are not putting up enough pressure, then nothing happens. As long as the people are not seeing the need to up the pressure, that as well will not happen. And all these things are being exposed. You know, what the government could have done, should have done, did not do. What's the status of our healthcare system? Not so good. What's the status of our social amenities? Like when you're talking about now, taking care of the elderly, the vulnerable. The government does not really consider these things, in a day-to-day running of government. We're discussing the other day schools and the children with special needs that need to access education. They're at home. The government has not come to address their plight. So what are they doing while they're at home? Somebody who runs a school that's a special needs school was saying, look, what is happening in homes where we have these kids with special needs is dire. These people need a different program that addresses them. But you see, the government has how the government has been functioning or has been thinking or has been just doing its things before this is exposing all these things with COVID-19.
The people have never been at the heart of any plan or any project. Yeah.
Yep. It's always about the people themselves. I mean, the government thinking, like Wanjiru is saying,
it's about
brick
a few
and mortar projects.
Yes,
few
that
individuals.
For a few individuals at the top, at the creme. I don't want to call them the creme de la creme, but at the top tier, it's about those ones. Then the rest of us who are at the bottom of the pyramid, we are a means to an end.
Yep.
We are the reason why there'll be a Chinese loan to do a certain construction. It's for the people.
Yep.
But is it what the people need? We will be the reason why we'll take a World Bank loan to give coffee farmers. Is that the priority? So it's about what these people up here need at the top of the pyramid, what their interests are, what is in it for them. Then the rest of you, if you get any breadcrumbs, then it's all right. You will live. If you don't, others will come and fill in at the bottom of the pyramid, which is...
There are many more that will emerge.
Yeah, which is a very sad state of affairs.
But what's the role of the citizens? And that's why I think, Ndu, you were asking, and Wanjiru was responding to this. For how long shall we have this conversation? And I keep saying, until the point when citizens are the ones who start owning the conversation, we still run the risk of electing people because you're looking at them as just people that we need to elect to participate in an election process. We get excited. It's our 5-year entertainment season. We get there, we get entertained because these people are coming, they're giving us money, they are calling us, they are insulting the other person, and we are contributing to this conversation, sitting in barazas and saying, you see, did you hear what so-and-so called the other person? Wow, this is the person I'm going to vote for. And after they go they occupy those particular offices, then we start sitting back and throwing stones at them, but not owning this conversation.
Look at what is happening in our houses of parliament, be it Senate or the National Assembly, where we have committees. For the sake of committees, what we were saying in the morning, there are people we've elected. There are people who have been selected. Let's say you're in a committee for health, for trade, for energy, I don't know, finance. Then when you want to hold the other side of government accountable, your cabinet secretaries or anyone in the ministry, it is like just playing to the gallery. Even sometimes the quality of questions that are asked leaves you with a lot to desire. You wonder, this is our whole human being elected and given that position on my behalf. And I could ask better questions and demand better. And then after that whole public display of, holding people into account, nothing ever happens.
It's playing to the gallery. Like I was telling you, the rumors out there are always, when you see these questions being asked, when you see people being summoned to parliamentary committees, when you see reports being produced by parliamentary committees, oftentimes it has been sponsored, or oftentimes it's to achieve a certain end. When regulations are passed, and the regulation comes up with a few clauses here and there. There's somebody who's already seen the business end of it. Last week we were talking here with C.T. Muga, and he was asking a question on the budgeting process and the new tax amendment law that passed that makes it more expensive to produce medical supplies locally, makes it cheaper to import medical supplies at this particular point in time, despite all the lessons that we're learning from COVID-19.
And on top of that, one of your big four agendas is manufacturing. Yet you're not incentivizing manufacturing. So what are we talking about? And you saw, you've mentioned medical supplies, and we should have probably discussed that yesterday on the Standard. But there is certain medicine for hypertension that would cost you between 30 and 60 shillings a month for a full dose. And when you import, it's in its thousands. Doesn't it make more sense to beef up manufacturing? Because at the end of the day, your medicines will be cheaper. It means people can afford. And even when you say you want to provide universal health coverage, if a drug is costing you 30 for a month's dose, as opposed to 1,000 for a month's dose, it will be easier for you to even cover for this and have everyone access healthcare. And it's a win-win for the public because they'll get their medicine, and for the manufacturers. And remember, these manufacturers create employment. They pay taxes.
Development is a win-win for everyone. And I think by the time leaders understand that, if you actually do your job, right, that which you've been mandated to do, if you actually do it, you actually win. It looks good. It's good for everybody. It's good for you. It's good for the people. Development begets development. You get to climb up on that ladder. The people across board are sorted out. Wanjiru mentioned countries whereby democratic agitation has worked. It was not a snap of the fingers, but they got to realize that a robust lobbying system made sense. The lobbying in the United States is so strong. It's a business.
It's a business, yeah.
Let's not use that as an example.
That's not a good example.
But just for now, okay.
For now, let me use it for now. But if we start, when it was not a business, somebody saw that, what we can actually do is I can actually start to speak about the things that I see that are not working. And I round up the people around me, and we come together, and then we take it up a step, and then we go up. People have conversations in their living rooms, and you find yourself on the floor of Congress. This is what I'm talking about. And they say, hold on a minute. There's so many people talking about this thing. Hadn't we better pay some attention? And that's why I do agree with you that at some point, the people either have to get pissed off enough with the way things are happening to start to talk about it and agitate for some kind of change. Before that happens, we're just going to continue having this conversation.
No, I think
yes,
can I throw in, because we're looking at the COVID response, and I think one of the big gaps is there's a lot happening, around the boardrooms of government that's not being communicated to the public. So on one hand, it's good. Government is thinking about these things. The shutdown was partial, a recognition that really Kenya cannot afford to fully lock down because 80% of the population is in informal trade. They live almost all of them, hand to mouth. A large section is hand to mouth, which means the daily wage is really important. So there's good thinking happening in there. But the problem is government is not communicating. Government has also not, and because it's not communicating, it also hasn't opened itself up for consultation. We are now beginning to see some level of consultation because they've now set up subcommittees. We've seen, parliamentary committees also beginning to engage. So, we've had the opportunity to have some pretty robust conversations around how are you going to protect the majority of employed in the agricultural sector, in the wholesale retail sector, especially the informal trade, manufacturing as well. So there are robust conversations happening. But because government is having these conversations behind the scenes, we will put in our best submissions.
Yeah.
Other actors will come in, put in the best submissions. And at the end of the day, the decision will be taken somewhere we cannot see.
The processing is done on a separate floor.
In fact, what we're hearing is that at the end of the day, the decision makers on where the money goes are seated in State House.
And they've already made their decisions.
It's not even the ministry, it's not Bunge. So when you have centralized decision making, it becomes very difficult because you will give your best submissions, but at the end of the day, then those decisions are taken by, unfortunately, then a small clique of mainly male, mainly male. Look, you see one or two women being put into the, let's say, this COVID fund board. Actually, it's being chaired by a woman, to be fair.
Yep.
But mainly men, private sector, big business. You're like, what do they know about the majority who are, living on less than $2 a day, who do not have access to government services, who are in the they do not know. So the problem is that this government doesn't believe in people, and so the way it responded is very defensive. It's kind of like, we're going to find the money, we're going to put the money there. And Kwame Owino did an op-ed from the get-go, and he said, don't throw money at the problem. Yes, we need the money, but there's a bigger problem. There's bigger governance challenges in terms of the structures. How do you structure the response, let's say, to the informal sector? You want to cushion these businesses, that some of which have been forced to wind up, others are operating off loans from Shylocks or eating into savings. Households are hungry. How do you target this so that you get past the cartels that operate in these sectors? And if you think you'll be able to craft that from the boardroom, then it's a joke. And this is why we're already beginning to see corruption rerouting itself. Without access to information, public participation, transparency, inclusiveness in the response, even the best intentions of government will be swept aside or will be undermined by cartels.
By all the things that we are doing now. 13 minutes to 9 o'clock, the Situation Room. The conversation continues. You can join the conversation on 0719-012-600. Also, you can comment on our social media handles, Spice FMKE, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter.